Hi, my name is Sasha Turchyn, and I'm in the Department of Earth Sciences at the University of Cambridge. And today, I wanted to talk to you about the carbon cycle. Now, you probably learned about the carbon cycle in school, or you've heard about it in the media. It basically refers to the movement of carbon all around our planet. And we think of carbon as being hosted in several reservoirs. Some example of reservoirs that have carbon in them are the atmosphere and the ocean, biology, soils. And we're particularly interested in the carbon that's in the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide or methane. And that's because both carbon dioxide and methane are powerful greenhouse gases, and they determine how warm our planet is. In addition to thinking about how much carbon is in each of these reservoirs, we often think about the processes or the rates of the processes that take carbon from one reservoir to another. For example, photosynthesis and respiration. But really, you could draw arrows all over this diagram, talking about the rates and magnitudes at which carbon is moved from one box into another. There's a reservoir missing from this slide. That is the rest of the planet. And carbon on the rest of the planet is in the form of a rock or a mineral. It's in magmas and coming out of volcanoes. It's down deep in the mantle in the center of the Earth. And it turns out there's 5 orders of magnitude more carbon in the rest of the planet than there is at the surface. And what I'm particularly interested in is what brings carbon from the rest of the planet to the surface, and what takes carbon that's at the surface and returns it into a rock or a mineral or back into the mantle. And so the research question that my group has been thinking about for the last 15 years or so is, how does carbon move between the surface and subsurface of the planet? And more specifically, the question that we've been thinking about for the last 5 to 7 years is, how do bacteria and other small organisms, single-cell organisms, process carbon and move carbon, and what role do they play in the carbon cycle? This is particularly interesting because bacteria, when they process carbon, can produce methane, and sometimes they can produce carbon minerals, such as calcium carbonate or the lime scale that you find on the bottom of your kettle. So my general field of research is in geo, and geo refers to Earth, microbiology, and that's because I study microbes. I study bacteria and archaea and what they're doing. And my secondary sort of scientific hat is in the field of bio for biological, geo for Earth, and chemistry, because at heart I'm a chemist. And so I'm interested in the chemical signals that bacteria and archaea are leaving behind, so that I can understand the role that they play in the carbon cycle. So how do I do this research? Well, we often go into the field to collect samples to see what bacteria in the environment are doing. And last summer, I had the opportunity to go to Lake Baikal in Siberia onto a research cruise. And we were out there for 2 weeks. And on this cruise, we would do some sampling of the water column, where we send bottles down to different depths and trap water. And we did some sampling of the mud at the bottom of the lake. And you can see here, this is a coring device that we would use to collect samples from the bottom of the lake. And we would bring the cores to the surface, and you cut them open, and you take a look at what you find. And you can describe the mud, you can take samples so you can characterize the biology. You can also do sampling right there. We had a chemistry lab on board, so we could do chemical sampling of the fluids in the muds to try and see if we could see the chemical changes that are driven by the bacteria living in the mud. And sometimes, when we were very lucky, we would find these cores that would come up with these white rocks in them. And they look like white rocks, but they're actually ice. And they're ice that is formed with methane in the middle. And so the bacteria have made methane, but rather than the methane as a gas escaping to the surface, it's formed an ice crystal. And that's a very interesting question. Why do bacteria sometimes make methane that gets trapped as ice? And under what conditions might that ice melt and release the methane back to the surface? What's really neat about having methane in ice is that you can light it on fire. And I don't know if you can see the flame coming off the cold piece of ice in the hand there, but hopefully you can see it in this video where I'm holding a piece of ice that is on fire. We also bring samples back to the lab where we can put bits of bacteria and mud into vials. We sometimes amend those vials. That means we add something or take something away, see if we can change what the bacteria are doing. And sometimes we'll look at the output under a scanning electron microscope. Here what we have is a bunch of bacterial cells that have become entombed in minerals that they've made almost accidentally. Their metabolism generated the chemicals that allowed them to mineralize their cell, and that makes these sorts of mineralized globules. And these are all carbon-bearing minerals that have tied carbon up in a mineral form. So I started this talk with a picture of the Earth, and we're interested in understanding how carbon moves in and around the Earth. And what I'd like to leave you with is the idea that by understanding the role that microbes play in mineralizing or releasing carbon, they are the engines that are driving the carbon cycle. Thank you very much for your time.